It's hard to believe that the 3DS was set to be a third-party monster, just like the Nintendo DS. It was announced with a lineup of 3 movies and 21 games, with 19 of them being third-party. Not long after, the 3DS launched with a staggering 21 games, with 3 of them being Nintendogs. There were games for everybody, no matter who you were. But as soon as the system launched, third-party support seemed to slow down. 5 of the 19 games announced at the reveal were cancelled. Only 3 of them scored above an 80, and Nintendo's focus went from being an all-in-one entertainment device to a gaming handheld with their name written on each game you played. But why did their focus change so rapidly? Welcome, WebWires! Growing up, I remember playing a lot of third-party games on the 3DS. I remember most of them being pretty bad for various reasons, but the number one reason being the developers not caring. So when I was met with a Nintendo-published game, or a good third-party game, it was a treat. And the fact I could still play all my old DS Lite games on the go meant I still had a large bargain bin of games to play. But what I think drove third-party titles away from the system was the 3DS's initial failure. The 3DS had a rough launch with a price tag of $250 and pretty lame launch titles. We had fun games like Pilotwings and Professor Layton, but most of them were on par with Asphalt 3D. They really went for quantity over quality. And the other features like movies weren't updated a whole lot. Yes, you could get a couple hours of fun exploring the 3DS itself, but applications that required Nintendo to constantly update them, like Nintendo Video, weren't supported the best. There wasn't anything bad with the system, but the price tag and launch titles surely put a lot of people off, and due to the system not picking up enough traction, a lot of people left it behind, and it was projected to be a big flop. The price dropped quickly to $170, which is a lot for Nintendo to do, but it worked. Early supporters were given some free NES and GBA games, which was cool to see, specifically because GBA games never came to the eShop publicly. Retro titles followed as a result, with systems being added as time went on. There wasn't a whole lot of third-party support in the retro market, but there were some strong titles. Castlevania, Harvest Moon, Mega Man, Shantae, Final Fight. If you want to play retro games on the go, I can easily recommend you buy a new 3DS, since it can play Super Nintendo games. I'd say the amount of retro titles easily overpower what the Switch offers, even if you have to pay for each game. I don't care who you are, the indie market was easily the best part of the digital store. In the beginning, there was basically only Cave Story, but towards the middle of the system's life, specifically 2015, so many developers dropped games. To be honest, I think support from the indie market around this time was stronger than Nintendo's lineup. Think about it. This was the start of Nintendo making pretty down-the-middle games because of the Wii U. We had 3 notable releases from them, and the indie market released Terraria, Shovel Knight, and The Binding of Isaac. People are still playing these games today. Not to say what Nintendo had offered was bad, but that some of the most influential indie games were either re-released or released onto the system. Not to mention Shantae again, SteamWorld Dig, Mutant Mudds, Art of Balance, Runbow, Tokitori. Come on. For being a handheld system from Nintendo, the amount of indie games on the system, especially with physical releases, is impressive. A lot of developers gave people the option to install demos to their system. It's a little less common nowadays, but I won't act like nobody does it. I remember getting a lot of mileage back in the day, downloading demos and playing them over and over, specifically Art of Balance and Nintendogs, who would have guessed. There was an impressive amount of free content to be had, and often the good and lengthy demos would lead me to purchasing the full game. I guess that's what a demo is supposed to do, but I feel like the 3DS did them best, simply because it's a handheld system, so you're not expected to play more than half an hour during a session. But no demo stood out to me nowadays than Resident Evil Revelations. How did they get this game to look the way it did? How? Capcom has done this before with Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64, but to get a game that still looks great and running in 3D on a system comparable to a PS2 is impressive. I get that the resolution is lower and the PS2 excels in some bits, but how? And the game itself isn't just a technical showcase, but is legitimately good. I played through the demo, and I've gotta say, ever since I played through it, I've been looking for the game physically. Capcom has always done a good job supporting the 3DS, all the way through. Street Fighter, Mega Man, Phoenix Wright, you're likely to see these games talked about eventually. Especially Monster Hunter, because the series stayed a 3DS exclusive for the longest time. I feel like they were the only consistent developer here simply because they saw what the 3DS could do and loved it. Anyways, Capcom is one of the best third-party developers for the system because of the quality and quantity of titles they were able to put out. Towards the end of the 3DS, it was overrun by JRPGs. This isn't a bad thing, but I feel like that's all we got. I mean, Fire Emblem was revived because of this system. Who wouldn't see a great market at this point? Pokemon was doing well, and so was Mario and Luigi. JRPGs exploded in popularity. The only third-party game I own is Yokai Watch, which I haven't even played yet. I own it, but that's the most I can say. I know a lot of people got what they wanted, including Bravely Default, Persona, and Dragon Quest, all getting good entries in their franchises. But looking back to the 3DS today, all I can remember from third parties are the abundance of JRPGs and indie games and retro titles. The launch lineup of games was definitely something to look at, but with a bad launch and then Nintendo not looking so good in the Wii U days, things were starting to fall apart, and this handheld looked like nothing but a portable failure to most third parties. When I think Nintendo, I don't think NES, GameCube, DS, Switch, I think 3DS. It had the most Nintendo put into any other system, and third-party titles usually targeted a Nintendo audience, like JRPGs and retro titles. It's something a lot of people will look back on and think about how much fun they had doing Nintendo-related activities, instead of doing things like watching Netflix or playing Assassin's Creed.